Hello, it's Darren from Moonhair Studio here, and I'm delighted to have with me the other half of the Mike Oldfield Discography podcast, Tobias Fischer, also based in Berlin. Tobias is a journalist, author, radio host, and now co-presenter of Except for the Sound of, the Mike Oldfield podcast. There must be something in the water in Berlin, Tobias. I mean, how do you fit all this stuff in?
Yeah, I mean it's a lot. I agree. I like to keep busy, and lots of this stuff is actually stuff I really enjoy doing. Especially like the podcast is one of the things I know we get really nerdy, and Markus has already said told you about the preparations we go into. Or actually, mostly I go into,
Yeah.
but it's something I genuinely enjoy. So
Yeah.
a lot of it doesn't feel like work.
No, and you've done thousands of interviews, so I'm feeling pretty
Mm.
intimidated about doing this one. You've worked on a project called 15 Questions, and I think that's been going for nearly 20 years, is it?
Yeah, it's between 15 and 20 years. And I think we're around 5,000 interviews now.
Good grief.
Yeah. But
It's
obviously a
incredible.
lot of them have been done by email.
Yeah, and it looks like you're then as prolific as Marcus is with his music.
Yeah. Yeah, there's something to that. Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. Okay then. Yeah, so I just wondered, first off, how did you first hear of Mike Oldfield? What was your first experience with Mike Oldfield?
I think I must have read something about him. I remember this is, I think, the beginning of the very first episode we did for the podcast. I remember going to, I was born in the Netherlands. There was a big department store, Home and Dreesman, and they had a sale going on. And I saw a really cheap version of Mike Oldfield's Tubular Bells. And I must have heard about this, and I bought that CD for 5 guilders, so €2.50. Um, this is actually something I can really recommend.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So this is not the original, but I don't think I knew this. It says tribute to Mike Oldfield's Tubular Bells, and it was really cheap, and I bought it. And it's really I think it's a Dutch synthesizer artist, and he essentially re-recorded the entire thing note by note.
Mm.
Um, and I think it's a really, really great um, cover version of that piece.
So when you
Uh,
say recording note by note, is he using the same instrumentation or is he doing it on keyboards then?
I think it's there. I'm not quite sure if the guitars, some of them could be original guitars. So I don't
Mm.
know. He must have had some people helping him.
Mm.
Most of it, I think, is just keyboards. But it sounds pretty good. It doesn't have the density of the original,
Mm.
but some of the like, especially the parts where you have long sustained organ notes, he does it on keyboard, and that actually sounds pretty great.
Mm.
It's a really curious thing, and I love that thing, and I think it must be one of the most played albums in my entire collection. It was so important to me, and I actually got round to buying or listening to the original much later. So I
Mm.
bought a lot of other, listened to a lot of other stuff by Mike later on. Um, yeah, I think yours was Tubular Bells too, right? The first thing you heard of him.
No, I actually heard Tubular Bells. Well, if I'm honest, the first thing I heard was the Blue Peter theme.
Ah, okay.
So that was our gateway into Mike Oldfield as children. You know, we bought that single as a charity record,
Hmm.
and then flipped it over, and there was Woodhenge, and I just thought this is the most
Ah,
extraordinary thing
yeah,
I've ever
yeah.
heard. Well, I was only like 12 or 13 at the time. And then that led to Tubular Bells, the original one. So yeah, yeah, that was my first album, really.
This was really one of the very first things I ever bought, 1988 or 89. And I think I'm generally attracted to things that are strange in a
Mm,
way, recognizable but strange. Um, and there was so much on this that I instantly loved, but there were also things which I thought you can't do that, like the long sustained build up to the finale on the first side. I think that's how can you? It just seemed incredible that you could sustain the bass
yeah.
pattern for such a long time before anything happens. But then I grew to love precisely that. It was such it just seemed so daring and so different. So I think it was a great piece to start off with. And then I would say between 89 and 97, that was the period where I was really following his music intensely. And the peak was probably Tubular Bells 2 when that came out. And after I would say after the Voyager album, it's slightly petered out.
Yeah. And speaking of recognizable but strange, how did you meet Markus?
Yeah, I think Markus said I was reviewing his music. I think I was probably also reviewing the music of some of the artists he was in touch with, or that he and Bernhard, who's also a good friend, and they're running a label/platform together called Japetus. And so I knew him by email, and then we decided to meet, and he came over. I lived in Münster, close to the Dutch-German border at the time, and he was, I think still based in Bielefeld, which is just pretty much the same size, smaller German cities. And he came over.
I've been to Bielefeld. I've played there. Yeah.
Ah, great. It's actually, I like Bielefeld. I didn't like Münster that much. And he came and he came over and he said, "Listen, I'm standing outside your house. I can't find a parking space." And so I came down and we just had a car ride through Münster. And I think we talked for 3/4 of an hour in his car. And then we met intermittently, and then we both moved to Berlin.
Yeah.
And I was just going to say the idea for the podcast came from a conversation we had a long time ago, probably like 7 or 8 years ago. And my brother was there with us, and we were talking about 5 miles out. And we were going really deep into it. And afterwards, my brother said, I don't think I've ever seen two people talk as deeply about modern music as you did just then, and you should do something with that. So I think actually my brother came up with the idea originally. And then, just 2 years ago, we finally put that into practice.
Yeah, and it is a really deep dive into everything connected with whatever album you're looking at. And I particularly enjoyed the fact that you started with Opus 1 and took that apart, although I mean, probably spoke quite a bit about Tubular Bells at the time as well, but it was fascinating listening to that. If I've had comments from people that have started listening to the podcast since I put the interview out with Markus, and they all sort of sometimes get a bit lost in the really technical time signatures and things like that's discussed, but they all find something really compelling and interesting, and they learn from the podcast. Do you learn stuff from each other while you're doing these conversations? Because I understand you don't really plan out exactly what you're going to say to each other beforehand.
Yeah, I think the first episodes were slightly, I had a sort of an idea about the structure. Actually, I came up with a structural template, but we never really, we threw that out the window right away. I think you called it nerdy. It is probably, it is very technical, yes. And I learn a lot, especially on the music theoretical front. I actually, for many years when I was listening to it at the beginning, I didn't notice all the like the thematic stuff, like the reuse of themes. I think I didn't like Crises, the title track. I wasn't that clear about the fact that this was a reuse of the Tubular Bells theme in major key. I didn't know that. I mean, I'd read that, but I didn't really hear it. So it took me a while to get into it. Also, a lot of the and you will know this probably as well from like just the recording quality of the analog originals is it's much murkier. You could call it it's warmer, but it's more blurry, which I think actually works to its advantage. But if you take, for example, the this one, which is the 50th anniversary, it's super analytical, and you can hear every single line in that one. So I think, yeah, I think technology actually today helps to actually to hear a lot of that. Yeah, I learn a lot about it. I mean, Marcus is an incredible musician, and his musical memory is incredible. So my notes are really just for me, so I don't forget a lot of the stuff I come up with while I'm listening to it. Um, but I agree. I think it's interesting. His take is very different than mine. I
Yeah.
think I'm trying to overcompensate my my lack in that department, like in the theoretical department, by finding my own way into the work.
Mm. Yeah, and that's the great thing is the two different perspectives because, well, you don't really want two people coming at it from the same direction saying exactly the same
Yeah,
things. And I think you do sometimes throw up albums that most people have disregarded
yeah,
completely or haven't even heard. And I've had to admit to myself there's gaps in my knowledge there of Oldfield's complete catalogue, and I've been going back and listening to these albums. And Heaven's Open is one that you were mentioning.
mm.
I mean, that's the podcast that you've just put out. You've got some takes on that. I mean, what's your view of that album?
Yeah. It's I don't think it's ever going to be a particularly popular album with most of the older listeners because I think probably it's the most unlike any of his other pieces. The sound is very different. And actually, after we recorded it, Marcus and I have been going, like, been talking a bit about it. I think he mentioned Peter Gabriel
Mm,
as a sort of a reference. I think he's right. I actually listened to Sledgehammer again, and there's like a lot of the it's like the songs on Heaven's Open. They work with background vocals. They have a sort of a soul funk um, band feeling to it.
mm,
Just the general vibe of the record. Um, it has this typical structure: one side songs, one side a long instrumental, but nothing really compares to it. I wouldn't say it's an obvious masterpiece. It's just an album I have very strong feelings for. So
mm.
just and maybe also the time when I bought it, I can still remember where I bought it and when I bought it. I had it on tape first, and I just listened to it obsessively.
Mm.
And I think few there's a few things on there which I think are genuinely great. I think um, No Dream is an incredible piece with an incredible solo. It's just a fantastic song. And I think there are sections on Music from the Balcony which are incredible.
So I had to go out and listen to this album before I came along today because I hadn't heard it,
Yeah.
which you'll be probably horrified to hear. And the one thing that struck me, and you mentioned this in the podcast, is that um, the the instrumental track, "Music from the Balcony." I listened to that while I was walking, and
Mhm.
it seemed to be over in a very short period of time, and yet
Yeah.
it is a 20-minute long piece. I couldn't
Yeah.
quite understand why it felt like that.
Yeah. I think in this short period of time between Amarok, actually we can go back to Islands and probably go then to this one. He has a way of working with sound which is completely unique, and it's sort of playing with time. And on this one, I think I don't know actually how he did it. I think there's a lot of intuition involved. I don't think it's planned so much. But yeah, it's a very clever way of using a tiny set of material,
Mm.
um, and yeah, I can listen to that piece two or three times like on repeat. Did you actually, because I know you're a big fan of Amarok, did you think
Mm.
this is sort of the little brother or sister of that
Well,
piece?
it had got, well, it sort of out weirds Amarok, I think, in many
Yeah,
ways. It it's very interesting because yeah, I am a big fan of Amarok. I love it. I can listen to that start to finish and start it again. Um, you know, it's crazy and insane in places, but it just really works for me, and it worked for all my friends at the time when it came out. We were just delighted. You know, it's just such a breath of fresh air, I think. Um, but yeah, I can see the parallels, and even down, and you've mentioned this as well, the distinctive guitar sound that Oldfield has during that short period of time. Really, it it's very hard to sort of pinpoint exactly what that sound is, but it's unique to that sort of period of his career.
Yeah. I've always wondered with these like Amarok and the music from the balcony where the material is actually taken from longer jams or longer instrumental passages and then edited down to fit the purpose of the composition, or whether he actually really just recorded these short segments, just exactly the length and in terms of the content, what he wanted. I did an interesting interview just recently with Ron Last, who is the son of James Last,
Oh, right.
famous
Okay.
German
Yeah.
big band leader, incredible producer, incredible musician. And James Last did this long series of records where they would sort of cover like popular tunes from like the 1968, 1969. There's 40 or 50 of these records available. And it's really sort of the TikTok concept. So you take a tune and you just take the best piece out of that like hit record, and then you glue them together. And so you have one side with 1 to 1.5 minute short sections, and that's side A, and then you have side B with a few more. And so I asked him, did the band play the entire piece and then you cut it out? No, they just played, they just started with the beginning, then they played for 1 minute, and then they stopped without, sometimes they wouldn't even play like the full verse, just the chorus. So I'm wondering whether he approached it from that angle. Maybe he just recorded 20 minutes of music and that was it.
I mean, I was listening to it on headphones, and it wasn't a dense sound at all,
No.
not in the way that some of his albums are. And that probably works well with digital as well, I imagine. But yes, the themes, there aren't that many themes in that piece. But it's even crazier than Amarok, I think, in the way it leaps around. But there are, I can understand the Gabriel references, because there are distinctive Fairlight sounds that Gabriel uses that appeared on that. It's not very often that I notice a sound as such, even as a keyboardist. You know, I grew up with analog keyboards, Mini Moogs and Jupiter 6s and, you know, Yamahas and stuff. So I do know a lot of the set sounds, but they don't tend to bother me with Oldfield's music, because I think he uses them in such a creative way.
And there's also the Hammond organ.
Yeah.
Which is also, I think there is also a Hammond on Sledgehammer.
Yeah, and it's the way the Hammond is used. I mean, I believe he did use Hammonds on Tubular Bells as well as Farfisas, but it was not the sort of classic Leslie speaker rotary sort of Hammond 60s type sounds. And that does actually jump out at you when you first hear it. You think, good grief, that's a departure.
Yeah. And funny enough, the first track, the first song on that one is completely different. That one is almost like it's pasted on afterwards, because it's so electronic sounding. Yeah, it's colorful, but it somehow gels. I'm not quite sure why. It's very hard for me to be like objective about this album. I don't know if it's good or bad. I really, really like it. Yeah.
What we haven't talked about is his vocals.
Yeah, I keep reading comments which essentially say it's not bad considering it's him. I think the vocals are great. I wish, because I know with Marcus, he talked about Earth Moving. I wish some of the vocals on Earth Moving and Islands had been him rather than some of the people he's worked with. Not because they're bad vocalists, but just because sometimes I feel I'm not sure if it's always like they're always singing it, and maybe I don't know. It doesn't always sound that natural to me.
Mm.
And in this case, it really feels you really feel that he means it.
Yeah, I wouldn't have realised that it was him singing if I hadn't known, and it makes you wonder why he didn't do that again. Yeah.
Apparently, I think I've read a comment. I think that's essentially from Tom Newman and him. I think he hints at it in his book as well. Is that it took too long to get them that good.
Right. Okay. So it was hard work.
It was hard work for the singers he's worked with. I think Maggie Riley, he really had her work for her takes, and now I think he got to see the other side of the like the thing, and maybe he just didn't enjoy it that much. I think
It's also such a personal thing, your voice.
mm,
And I would think most vocalists feel very self-conscious about their voice. And if you criticize somebody's guitar playing because they've made a mistake, I don't think that's anywhere near as personal as saying, well, your voice is awful. Because there's absolutely nothing you can, well, there's not absolutely nothing you can do. You can train, but you have your voice. You can't change that voice, really. Yeah. Of the albums that you haven't covered so far, are there any particular ones that you're sort of looking forward to, that you're sort of thinking, oh, I'll be really pleased when we get to this one?
I would say Tubular Bells too.
Yeah.
That's been also even before we started the podcast, we came back talking about that one again and again, and it's an album. I think I'll never entirely be sure about that one, how I feel about it. Right now, I think it's great, but there are like it's a weird thing, but there is so much to say about it, and it's so incredibly well crafted. Um, Actually, when I listened to it just a week ago, I thought this sounds better to me than it ever did.
Mm.
Strangely, even better than when I first listened to it, because then I was sort of had mixed feelings. So that one for sure, and then the Songs of Distant Earth, because that one, that was,
Yeah.
I think you mentioned Amarok was big for you and some of your friends, and Songs of Distant Earth was big for me and some of the people in my school. That was the right album at the right time.
It's interesting you should mention that one, because that again is one that I've played a lot. I love the sound of that album, but it felt so different to everything he'd done. It almost sits on its own, I think. I'm not sure, but I may be proved wrong when you do that podcast. You may be linking it backwards and forwards. I'm honestly learning all sorts of things. I thought, I've got quite a good ear. But when Marcus just sort of puts his self and his mind to it, he's pulling out all sorts of links that I've never noticed before.
Yeah, no, that is actually the same for me. I think what sort of has always felt weird to me is that the Songs of Distant Earth is so incredible in its own right. It's I think it's his first real entirely electronic album, and he seems like a natural in that environment. There's so much he does with his elements, which I think is super creative, and a lot of electronic producers I think would benefit from listening to it, because it's so inventive, and it's also the way the piece flows. It's very long, and it flows extremely well. And then he continues in that direction, but everything he does after that feels like I don't know, like it feels more shallow. It feels like he had it right the first time, and he hit a nerve the first time, and then everything else seems like a bad copy of that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it's a beautiful piece of music. I can again listen to it again and again. It's not necessarily on my rotation all the time,
Mhm.
but when I come back to it, I just really immerse myself in it.
Yeah.
But yes, I think the reason why it seemed so obscurely different to me at the time was because I hadn't listened to the albums like like Heaven's Open. I don't know why that gap was there. I know at
Mhm.
that stage in my life I was just starting to tour professionally as a musician, and so I wasn't really quite connecting with record stores and things. I was out and about. But yeah, I went from Amarok to Tubular Bells 2, and
Mhm.
Tubular Bells 2 to me again I like that album a lot. That is it is an interesting album. I couldn't quite work out how he managed to replicate every single section. It must have taken a lot of planning to do that.
Yes. Yeah, that one for sure.
Yeah, that was going to have to be a lot of deliberate decisions rather than an organic process, I would imagine. But
Also, probably, this is something we'll, I'm sure, get into when we do the podcast on that album. Tubular Bells 2, I think there must have been sort of a sketch for an entire album other than the one which was released, I would assume, because we know that there were like early stages is a published excerpt of the first draft at Tubular Bells 2, and it would have been very different from the one which
right.
got published.
And are there recordings of that then that you know
Well,
of?
I have to have a look at for that because, well, early stages, that is the opening section that is available.
Hmm.
Yes. And the other ones I've read that they're supposed to be on the internet. You should supposed to be able to find some excerpts. I don't know if that's true, but I'll have a look.
I'm also interested because you do interview a lot of different musicians, and you've sort of hinted that you might be interviewing people that were working with Oldfield and try to find out a little bit more about those sessions because there's a lot we don't know, and we're all aware that the time is passing,
Yep.
and these people are not spring chickens anymore.
Yep.
So have you got any plans to interview any of those collaborators?
Yeah, we're actually drawing up a list right now and looking at who we'd like to talk to. I mean, some lots of these people have already been interviewed, some of them several times. Um, it would be interesting to see if we could get something very different from them. But one of the things we're contemplating right now is maybe doing inviting them to reaction videos where we actually have the composition playing and then we listen to it and zoom in on particular passages which we find interesting, and then comparing our ideas about them with the actual with what actually happened.
That would
Um,
be exceptional. I would love to see that.
yeah, me too. Actually, there was something which came up at the end of the last podcast episode. That I think it would be interesting, and it would take it out of this the historical thing, because I think the music is actually really living, and you can actually like there's lots of reaction videos by younger YouTubers where they listen to the music, and I think as much as that is possible within this format, they actually really seem blown away by the music. I think it just needs to find its audience again, and I
Mm,
think that would be a way of doing that. Um, and it's also because Mike, I don't think is always the best. He's not even Changeling is not a historical book in many respects. It's certainly not like the Klaus Kinski autobiography, where it's probably more fiction than biography. Um, but I think he does this passage in there where I think, well, I'm not sure if that's actually how it went down.
mm,
Um, so I think maybe getting the people around him involved would be super interesting to get the full picture.
yeah. An interesting period in his life was when he went into this sort of therapy that kind of changed his outlook and seemed to, in some ways, change his personality. I mean,
Mm.
that allowed him, I suppose, to do the Exposed album and go out on tour.
Yeah.
But it happened kind of in the recording of Incantations. Do we know the timeline there?
Well, that is actually a big part of the book, but I haven't read up on it in a
No.
while. Um, yes, I do think it's just slightly before that. But after that, he's on and off therapy.
Mm,
Actually, Heaven's Open, he's in therapy
mm,
again. And I'm pretty sure he was in therapy later, which doesn't actually have to mean anything particularly bad. I mean, many people
no.
do it regularly just to get something out of their system. But yes, I think there is definitely a change in the music after that, like the big therapy, the big um, screaming therapy um,
Yeah.
in the beginning. I don't think, like even Return to Ommadawn, that's not a return, actually, I think. Um, it's sort of coming back to it from a different angle, but I don't think he would ever be able to replicate the emotions and um, the anger, the pent
Mm,
up aggression that's on pieces like Ommadawn or the Tempest section of Hergus Ridge.
yeah. Well, especially some of the, I mean, really screaming guitar in Ommadawn towards the end of side one,
Yeah,
where you have those sort of runs up, so
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
and the way that he uses vibrato, I don't hear that anywhere else really. It just creates that awesome voice in his guitar playing.
Yeah, it's virtuosity on a very different level. It's I think Neil Young sometimes has that, but on a
Mm,
very much less obviously flashy,
mm,
where it's just the tone of the guitar actually is what speaks to you rather than what he is playing.
yeah, yeah. Um, I just wondered about this return to Ommadawn, because it is his swan song now. Really, we don't expect him to be recording any more studio
Mm.
albums, and I did enjoy it, and I'm glad in a way that
Mm.
he returned to that for the sort of final hurrah. Um, but it it does feel that we've lost out maybe on some more music.
Yeah,
Uh,
no,
um,
definitely.
yeah.
I think it's a great album. I think it belongs in the upper echelons. I didn't, I was unsure about it. I think like Marcus was at first. But then I spent, I think, a week listening to it intensely, and I was deeply moved by it. Maybe also
Mm,
because I knew it was, I came to it back to it a bit later, and then realized it might actually indeed be the last thing we'll hear from him.
mm,
Um, it really touched me.
mm,
I think it's a very simple album. I don't think it was done particularly well technically. I don't think this argument that it's supposed to be imperfect sticks. I don't think that is. I think it's just sloppy.
mm,
Um, but somehow the minimalism, the simplicity of it,
mm,
um, and it is incredible. And then it also has sort of an understated finale.
mm,
Um, there's something which ends. It's almost like he's saying something is ending here.
mm,
Um,
mm.
and that's just incredibly beautiful.
As an interviewer and journalist, I imagine you must find it quite frustrating, the lack of really in-depth interviews that we have.
Yeah,
Even when you're scouring YouTube, they all feel quite superficial.
yeah.
Has anybody managed to sort of break through and get some nuggets of gold from Oldfield, do you think?
Well, there's the interview Anil Prasad did, of course, for interviews, which is probably the best we have on the web in written form. I'm pretty
Mm,
sure. Um, even that one probably, um, I think that was already hard to get to some of the stuff because it was in the past. He loves Amarok. Um, in that interview, Mike said it was his favorite album.
right.
I'm always skeptical. I'm not sure if that is actually seriously is a fact, but that is a great interview to start off with. Other than that, I actually suspect there must be more from this. There's a few really good ones on the tubular.net site, which is the Oldfield fan website. And they have a pretty great collection of interviews from print magazines through the years. Some of them, I can't tell you which ones now, but some of them are really excellent. Some of them are really, really good. People who've actually met him and spent more than just an hour with him.
Yeah.
I was pretty close once when he did the Tubular Beats album, which was the remix album he did. I almost had one with him, but then it fell apart at the last minute. I'm not sure. Maybe I was probably too late with that one. I think I was on vacation and came back and saw it in my inbox, and it was just too late. But I'm not. I think it would be difficult even for me to. Because sometimes I think now it can seem as though he doesn't really like to talk about the pieces, and I'm not sure. Like even with Heaven's Open, which is an album we know pretty much nothing about, I don't know if I need to know much more. Maybe I'll leave it at that. I mean, part of what makes the podcast fun is that we're getting to spend a lot of time talking about stuff which doesn't really mean anything in the bigger scheme of things. It just means a lot to us.
Yeah.
We can go into that maybe in a second, but there's sort of detective stuff. You realize, you listen to something, and then you realize, okay, now I understand where that came from. I just really had a realization about that with the first piece of Heaven's Open. And then you understand something, but what does it really, like, does it change my feelings towards the music? Probably not. It just makes you understand something that you have a strong emotional connection with.
Yeah. I think I'd agree. I'm not going to stop liking Ommadawn if somebody says, "Oh, well, this is just awful." But I think what the podcast does enable people to do is maybe have a bit more of an open mind about an album that they dismissed out of hand, and go back and think, well, actually, there are some things of merit here. Even if I don't like the whole album, there will be some little spots that, really bright, burn bright. I mean, I just love some of the discussions about lyrics as well, because, I mean, lyrics for me are not necessarily the most important thing, but some of the anomalies in lyrics are quite interesting. And I did mention to Markus about Saved by the Bell. Just an incredible realization about the chorus and verse structure there that I'd never really thought of. And
really, I think on Heaven's Open, to get back to that one, I think lyrics really work. I don't think he's the greatest. I think lyrics are underappreciated in pop music. I think even if you're not thinking too much about them, and even from people who claim, I don't listen to the lyrics, they're unimportant, I listen to the music, I think the lyrics are super important. And so one of the people I interviewed just briefly about Tubular Bells 2 was Trevor Horn. And he is like, he would claim that the lyrics are 50% of the success of a song. And I think really one of the reasons why Mike's music, like the pop part of his music, didn't really have long-lasting success, I think is the lyrics. I think the lyrics are not just on a pop music level, they're not good enough. But he has penned a few great ones, and I think on Heaven's Open they work, maybe because he wasn't overthinking it, maybe because that album was really done almost in a rush. I don't think it was done in over hasty, but I think it was done very quickly. And the lyrics maybe penned down, written written them down quickly and then left them as they were. And that's why they're so strong.
I mean, we wouldn't expect him to be sort of Lennon or McCartney, I don't
No.
think. And who is? Let's
Yeah.
face it. Um, but yes, maybe sometimes the lyrics seem quite simplistic in a way, or perhaps a little bit on the cliched side. But then there are some beautiful songs as well,
Mm.
and he pulls it out the bag. Sometimes I'm not sure whether they're all his lyrics or whether somebody else was involved with helping out. You do wonder if maybe some of the singers had some input, or were they
Mm.
just, I don't know. It's difficult to know, isn't it?
That is really difficult to know. I was skeptical. I'm skeptical about a few of them. Just if you place them side by side, some of them are just in a very different tone and way of writing. But then again, I mean, it's art, so it's not impossible for someone to come up with something really, really different. Um,
Mm.
like if you were a fan of Mike Oldfield in 1973 when Tubular Bells came out, would you have imagined that he'd ever release something like the Songs of Distant Earth,
Mm.
um, which is not just a more contemporary piece of music. It's also very, like compositionally, it could have been done by someone entirely different.
Mm.
Um,
Uh,
so I guess it's possible.
he doesn't make it easy for you to be a fan of all of his
Yeah.
music, but then do you really want to just hear the same piece of music over and
Mm.
over for 50 years? I mean, no artist could possibly gain any pleasure out of just regurgitating the same stuff
Yeah.
year after year after year. I think you have to have those diversions and experiments, don't you?
Yeah. And I think the one thing that I think we can definitely say is that he's almost always been honest with the music he's released. It's whatever he's done, it tends to be stuff he's interested in at that time. Um, and you can like it or you don't have to like it all, but I think when at the time he was doing it, he was really he stood behind it 100%.
Mm.
I actually think the late 90s, which are probably the most difficult period in his discography, probably he was already in a sort of a semi retirement then. And I think quite a few of these albums are not proper studio albums, I would say. Um, so if you discount for those, I think you have a discography in which every single album is something meaningful. And some people left the train at some point.
Mm.
I know, for example, Man on the Rocks. Marcus loves it, but I'm pretty sure that that was not what people were hoping for when he came back with that album.
Yeah, I listened to that as well, and I haven't come to a decision yet. He says diplomatically,
Diplomatic, exactly.
but I will have to listen again. No, I do feel the duty bound to check all of this material out, and especially ones that I missed first time round, and especially as we are unlikely to get any more albums. It's actually quite refreshing to know that there's still stuff I haven't listened to and can
Yeah.
go back on. Um, you're probably going to take quite a while to get through the studio albums even, but then you plan to go back and do things like the live albums, soundtrack,
Mm.
stuff like that.
Well, yeah, because I think, especially in the mid 80s, I think the live part of his work was probably more important than the studio albums in a way. I think the Discovery tour where Marcus saw him first, that would have been something I would have loved to have seen him then. Because this combination of the song oriented material from Discovery and then the radically different takes on some of the earlier instrumental pieces, that is super exciting.
So
Um,
then I'll make you feel envious because I saw him first on that tour as well,
mm,
about 3 weeks before Marcus. So I saw him in London at Hammersmith, and then yeah, Marcus saw him in Essen, and that was yeah, pretty awesome experience.
yeah. Did you see him on Tubular Bells too?
No, no, didn't get to that one. No. So you seen him live?
No, but I could have seen him live, and I
Oh,
always, looking back, regret not doing it. At the time, I think that was probably my time of biggest fandom, and I just thought, no, do I want to see him just perform the piece note by note live? No, I'm not going to do it.
hmm,
And a friend of mine did, and I think I'm going to interview my friend who now also lives in Berlin and ask him about his memories of that gig. Um, but it was then definitely very different. So that was really more of a classical setting.
hmm.
Um, Whereas the Discovery tour you were on, I suppose you prior to it, you probably didn't know exactly what you were into. Um,
No, and actually, it was only the fourth gig I'd been to,
yeah,
so I wasn't even familiar with the format of how gigs work. Really,
yeah.
it was all new as a teenager. Um, but yeah, a sort of quite well for me. I thought quite a large band, but of course, incredibly stripped down from what he did with Exposed.
Yeah.
Totally different format, really.
Did
Yeah.
he play Ommadawn on that gig?
Yeah, I believe it was a an extract. Yeah, from Ommadawn. I mean, my memory is very hazy. What I really remember is going back to the stage door and thrusting an album and my well, in fact, I've got it here. I think I got it. Yeah, because I bought that when I
Hmm.
started learning piano, and said to my piano teacher, "Can I play that?" And she said, "I don't think you're quite ready for this after a few weeks of piano." But yeah, I got him to sort of sign it for me, and yeah, it was great. I didn't see the man himself though. You just hand them over to the flunkies, and they take it in
Ah,
and then bring it back.
wow.
Yeah. One album that I've listened to again for the first time and you haven't covered yet is Music of the Spheres. And again, this is a complete departure. Is that an album you're familiar with?
Yeah, I don't know if I should talk too much about it. I actually reviewed it for a classical music magazine at the time. So that's the only one I actually reviewed while it came out. Yeah, I mean, we're not. I think we did sort of implicitly, without words, agreed not to do a ranking video.
Yeah.
I think that's that album. I would say that's a wasted opportunity to say most like that would be the most friendliest thing I could say about it.
Hmm.
Definitely, I think it has the most horrific production of almost any album I know. It sounds absolutely like horrendous. It's recorded like a pop album, but it's orchestral music. So it has a really unnatural sound, also unnatural reverb, which I think is like, why would you not go for a nice natural reverb? I'm sure they could have had that done by a great classical producer. I don't actually know who recorded it.
Hmm.
Um, and also, I think if you get asked to write like a classical piece with an orchestra, why then again revisit old material? I think it's sort of it sticks too close, it hews too close to the template of Tubular Bells. I think. Um, yeah, that's the one I'm almost that I have bad feelings about that one.
So
Um,
I would I'll take exception to that then and say that
sure.
I've enjoyed a lot of the content in there. The bits that I think classical orchestras find hard to do is like the classic tubular bells piano riff.
Mhm.
That's hard to do on a stringed
Yeah.
instrument without any frets, and it never sounds quite as fluid.
Mhm.
So it does stick out. But I've I find some of the melodies in that piece really gorgeous. I'm only just getting acquainted to it, um, but yeah, I can see what you mean about the production side of things. Um, in a way, a bit like the first Tubular Bells Orchestral. It's a kind of flawed
Yeah.
um, recording, really, in some ways. Not easy, I don't think, in a
No.
classical sense to replicate. Whereas Hergest Ridge works because it's almost feels like it's got that classical structure anyway. In many
Yeah.
ways,
The
really
orchestral
works with
Hergestridge,
strings.
the orchestral
Sorry.
Hergestridge, that would be something I'd buy instantly. And I think a lot of people are waiting for it. I actually heard, I'm not sure if that is true, that it's supposed to come out. That it's sort of an integral recording of the orchestral Hergest Ridge. Not sure if it's true, but um, this nice passages on music of the spheres for sure. I like the Haley. I think Haley Westenra is a good choice as soprano.
Yeah,
that's very nice.
actually, that reminds me very much of the soundtrack of a game called Everybody's Gone to the Rapture, and a beautiful soundtrack with this soprano voice over the top, and it sort of reflects that type of sound. I'd like to know just a little bit about how people can discover your content online. We will post links obviously in the chat, but of course you're working on a number of different platforms at the moment.
So I write as a cultural journalist for a German magazine called Beat, which is a production magazine, but there's two editors, me and someone else, who also write about the like do interviews with musicians about creativity and songwriting and production, maybe from a less technical angle, and that's at beat.de. Although the website isn't that particularly great, I think it's really there's an English PDF version which you could check out. And then I would say the most important one is really 15 questions at the moment.
I mean, there's a huge wealth of articles there that are just absolutely encyclopedic, really.
Yeah, it's a maze. It is completely no organization on that site. So that's something we'll have to work on. But there are links in between the interviews, so you can actually spend some time on it just using the search function. 15 questions. I still have the hope of that site somehow growing into other fields. Literature. I actually started literature, and then COVID came, and I built up all these sort of a network with publishing houses and art like writers, and that fell apart during the pandemic. That's something I'd like to get back to maybe also get sort of the to allow you to see how artists from different fields look at similar questions of creativity and how, for example, some people would argue that music is like sculpting. It would be interesting if some sculptors feel like what they do is like music.
Yeah.
In the last episode, I quoted Joan Didion from her book Blue Nights, and she actually has a passage in there where she describes how she writes. And it's almost, I thought it sounded exactly like I could imagine Mike Oldfield writing music from the balcony. So those are questions which interest me on 15 questions. Yeah, it's a big, it's sort of a monolith. It's and I think part of it is because it's something where I try to take a step back as a person and just let the artist do the talking.
Excellent. Well, look, thank you very much for taking the time to speak to me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Who knows? One day I may be over in Berlin, and I'll look you and Markus up.
That would be great. Yes.
But yeah, good luck with the rest of the podcasts, and I'll certainly be tuning in each time to wave my fist when I disagree and
wait for music of the spheres.
Exactly. But it's always a pleasure to hear the different takes on his discography. So thank you very much, and good luck with the rest of it.
Thanks a lot.
Great. See you then.